Welcome everybody to Dharma Punk Seattle. It's good to see you all. For tonight, I don't really know what the talk is going to be about. My general leaning is to move into the idea in Buddhism called bhava, which we talked a little bit about a couple weeks ago. The Ajahn Chah story of the flood of sensuality. And bhava in English translates to becoming. And in my own personal life, I've been reflecting a lot on this concept and how to balance becoming in a world that is, demanding that we be something. We have to have jobs, we have to show up for people, we have to do certain things. And yet, in Buddhism, it warns us that this becoming will lead to suffering. That in the 12 links of dependent origination, which I'm not going to go through the whole 12 because that's a big list. But the idea of dependent origination is that that through these 12 links, suffering arises. And within those 12 links, what happens is, as Buddhism is constantly talking about, craving happens. And then we start in on this becoming. So craving starts to happen, the becoming starts to happen, birth starts to happen, and then ending with sorrow, lamentation, despair, suffering. And one of the difficult aspects from a psychological perspective that is talked about a lot in Western psychology, but to truly identify it and understand what it means is self-worth. Because I think that is where we get hung up a lot in the becoming. It's often the place where we feel, when I become this, when I get this, when I get this status, when I get this relationship, when I get this job, when I get this community, then everything will be okay. And what we find, though, is that when our self-worth is dependent on the exterior, then we will likely suffer because the exterior is fluctuating and changing, right? The impermanent nature of it all. And so I don't know, I haven't seen too many popular psychology teachings about self-worth that explain it well. I think it's a common thing that people talk about, but very little, like, how does one get it, if not through checking off achievements, like a video game. And Buddhism tells you that it's not useful to do that, right? That it says it will only lead to sorrow, lamentation, and despair, but doesn't really help very directly in how one would achieve self-worth. Because that was not the language they used 2,600 years ago. And I would venture to say from a Buddhist perspective that one of the reasons it's not really explicitly said is that from a Buddhist perspective, everybody has what they call Buddha nature. And often when we think of Buddha, right, we think of that guy, that person. And Buddha is just a quality, a title. It's not a person. And so the idea is that what a lot of this practice is aiming us toward is uncovering that we are a Buddha. And maybe that language doesn't really resonate with you. I don't really feel personally a lot of like, I don't know, I'm like, do I want to be a Buddha? I'm like, I don't mind being like him, but I don't know if I want to be a Buddha. And so looking at it from the maybe the more Western perspective of just worthy to be here, just already good enough, already, and that it wasn't that, you know, the Buddha did all of these things and obtained something. Rather, it was an uncovering of something. One of the suttas that they talk about often is that the practice will be like a stained cloth, and rather than how we might do with like, oh, this is a stained cloth, that's trash, right? Like, and that's how we refer to ourselves. Oh, this is stained, it's trash. The idea is that through this practice, through the Eightfold Path, through meditation, it is an agent of cleaning, and that it cleans the cloth. And just so that the cloth is dirty doesn't make it less valuable. It's still the cloth. And so looking at it from self-worth from a Buddhist perspective can be a little bit tricky. And one of the ways that I hope to tie this in the remainder of the talk is through Adlerian psychology. He was kind of the first psychologist who said, Freud, you're fucking stupid. There's this like, I have this other idea. And Freud was like, no, I'm the master of psychology, and like really didn't like Alfred Adler. But he came up with some really fundamental tools that many of the more modern psychology takes today pull from. And if you've ever heard of like having a complex or inferiority or anything like that, like all of that comes from Adler. And so I'll tie those in together. One of the things, and this is the question today, is just to see how this lands and how this hits, is one of Adler's famous quotes is that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And so that can be a really interesting perspective. The discussion today is to whatever it is that's coming up for you. Maybe this one will feel like really obvious and you're like, yeah, my problem right now is that bitch. That is an interpersonal relationship problem. But some of them might be a little bit more subtle. And discuss that and to reflect. So if you're tuning in on the live stream, go ahead and meditate or journal on the topic. Thank you. All right, let's meditate. Finding a comfortable way to sit that is upright. Finding your breath, either at the nose or the rise and fall of chest or abdomen. Taking a moment to relax any tension, letting the shoulders drop away from the head, softening the belly, relaxing the jaw. And for the next 30 minutes, setting an intention to let go, of the day, the week, to let go of planning for the future. You have all the time to worry about that later. And just allowing yourself to be here. Take a break. Give yourself a break. Arriving in the present moment. The mind may want to wander, It's just coming back to that intention. I'm giving myself a break right now. Let me rest. Softening the body over and over again. Noticing the energy of the mind. Is the mind relaxed, accepting of the instructions? Is the mind restless, defiant? Is the mind lazy, drifty? Sometimes being able to identify the mind's energy, we can have more objectivity and begin breaking the addiction to the mind. That's so good at telling us, oh, but this plan can't wait. This memory can't wait. It needs to be now. Again, expanding the focus of the breath. If you're focused at the nose, allowing the breath to drop into the belly. If you're focusing on the belly, allowing the breath to ascend to the nose. And following, tracking the breath as it rises and falls through the body. As you inhale, noticing how the lungs fill, the sensation in your cheekbones, through the nostrils, the slight tensing of the belly, and the exhale, the air moving down the lower part of your face, the deflation of the chest cavity. Now begin turning awareness to the thinking mind, keeping the awareness of breathing in the background. And with some objectivity, letting the thoughts come up, and seeing if you can break them down into its simplest form. The thought connected to a story, how this is going to benefit me, how this is going to hurt me. I know this benefits me and hurts me because of my experience, the years of experience. The Sankara, the programming that has created a perception, and then once you've broken that thought apart a little, you can take it further into, is it pleasant or unpleasant or neutral? Knowing the feeling, that gave rise to a perception and a story. And taking that even further back to, what was the sense contact that we learned this emotion from, pleasant or unpleasant? The first time we heard a condescending word, the first time we tasted the food that we crave, the sense contact, taste, smell, sound. Touch. In Buddhism, the mind is a sense. And whatever it was that we made contact with that created this long line of narrative and thought is the four elements. We take a thought and we break it down into its smaller and smaller, more manageable component until all that's left is the four elements. from the thought arising in our consciousness. We identify the story, the fear that brings this thought forward. The need for control, the craving, and we break that in half to see the perception, breaking it apart again to see the feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Breaking it apart further to see the sense contact, origination, and seeing the four elements. This process of breaking things down into the four elements is known as the five aggregates of a self, of the I, the me, the part of us that we often identify with, and for the last few moments of the practice, letting go of this practice and bringing loving kindness to ourselves, appreciation, that so often we struggle to appreciate our efforts and that they're never good enough. So, through that five aggregates meditation, breaking things down into their smaller and smaller and smaller components until all that's left is the four elements. And it's an important part of understanding the bhava and the becoming aspect of this practice is the way that it is so intermeshed with the Buddhist concept of anatta, of the not self. And on the face of it, having no self can sound insane. And very confusing, especially when, a huge part of the talk tonight is going to be self-worth. So how does one have self-worth and no self at the same time? And often when people are introduced to the concept of not self, people can get really weird with it. They, trying to take pronouns out of their vocabulary completely, and just speaking from a very strange, and that's not what it's trying to point toward. Still using regular language is appropriate in the Buddhist practice. The part where the anatta is useful is in this lens of so many of the beliefs that we have aren't ours and aren't consistent. How many things can you look back on throughout your life that you were so certain about? You were so certain that this was the way that it was going to be. This is a belief that I have. This is true about me. And then, lo and behold, it was wrong. You grew, something in your life changed, and it's different. And so what the concept of anatta is trying to get us to understand is that there is no consistent self, that it is a clashing of causes and conditions at a moment over and over and over again. Which is the danger of the becoming. Thinking about it from a Buddhist perspective, thinking of how maybe some people, me in my early meditation practice, would try to sit in meditation to appear to be looking very spiritual, and that wasn't, I think that there was some intention of I want to do the practice correct, but also looking at it through the lens of I want others to see me as somebody who is looking spiritual in that moment, or content, or knows what they're doing. And, what happens when that breaks? What happens when we are a singer and our voice goes away? And it's not trying to take goals or take things away from us, but trying to help us consider that putting so much emphasis on these things as these beliefs, as who we are, is a dangerous place to be, because they are very much subject to change. Either from our own understanding, and going back to the example of, beliefs that we might have had when we were younger, and now we've learned other things, and we look back at that old person and we're like, that person is a fucking idiot. stupid person. And that's unfortunate, because that means, is that person unlovable? Is the version of you that might be a little ignorant unlovable? If we're only lovable when we achieve a certain status, be it in, exterior in life, or, even in the way that, we have so greatly learned to prioritize mental health in the past several years, but it becoming this ongoing, I'm never quite good enough yet. And that really beginning to chip away at our self-worth. From a objective view, you probably wouldn't tell your friend that when they were in their early 20s that they were unlovable for having silly goose beliefs. But we hold ourselves to those standards. We hold ourselves to the standard that until I have things in a certain way, I'm not worthy. And again, from the Buddhist perspective, the way that if the Buddha came, I feel like if somebody came to the Buddha, as people did in the suttas so often, and said, I have a problem with self-worth. I feel like I am not worthy of love, or of this or that. The Buddha would probably answer with the anatta concept, would answer with, well, there is not a self, comma. He also placed so much emphasis on Sangha and generosity. If there's no importance of individuals, why would there be an importance on Sangha, interpersonal relationships, and generosity? And so that's where I feel the self-worth is addressed, because it is through those means of generosity and community that we create meaning. And going back toward Alfred Adler, that is similar to his philosophy, is that we create purpose and meaning from community. And that when we talk about his very brazen statement, all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. This comes from similarly to how we talk about with the 5 aggregates, that it starts from a story. It starts from, as Alfred Adler says, that our inferiority, our inability to have self-worth, comes from our stories we tell about ourselves from when we were very young. That if I was a child and I had to bend over backwards to get attention from my family members, that's what I learned to base my worth off of. If I was in a situation where I watched one parent be extremely domineering over the other, then that might be how I view relationships. That some relationships are in fact hierarchical, that they are vertical, and that one person is above and the other is below, and that I move through life trying to what he calls, I forget the exact phrase, but trying to become superior. Like I have the inferiority complex, and I'm trying to gain superiority over and over again. And so with more modern language, this is where we are constantly trying to prove our self-worth through the prestige of becoming, of getting things, of getting the relationship, of getting the titles. Adler actually says there's actually nothing wrong with inferiority. It's when it turns into a complex where we view each other in a hierarchical form, that's when it becomes a problem. But that, some amount of inferiority is what is giving us goals and drive, which I kind of appreciate that separation because, in Buddhism, right, we talk about, well, we shouldn't do the whole becoming thing, but like, how do we still plan stuff and try to, have a life. And so I feel like that perspective really kind of helps give some substance and be able to split that hair a little bit more clearly. And ultimately, what we want to do is to eliminate the vertical relationship, that other people are superior and I'm inferior. Or, that the other way, I am superior and others are inferior, that we can fall into either category. And that if we are in a space of saying that we're superior, we're protecting ourselves from vulnerability. That if we can, it allows us a little bit more control. If we're in the space of always coming at things from I am inferior, it's a safety net from rejection. Because if I just tell myself already that I'm inferior, then I don't have to put myself out into the next level and risk that vulnerability. And so being able to, Adler's thing is courage is a huge part of being able to get into horizontal relationships with people. And that fits neatly into Buddhism because, the Buddha talks about not looking at others as better than or less than or even equal to, because what we're trying to do is taking out the comparing of others. It's the comparing mind is such a powerful thing. If you go on Instagram for a touch too long and suddenly you feel awful and you're like, oh, I didn't notice I was comparing myself for a second. And I think that's one of the brilliant parts of the Adlerian psychology is that it really tells us that so much of what we think makes us unworthy of existing, because that's what it is, right? It's unworthy of existence. We think that it's unworthy of certain things, but we're unworthy of existence. And, so he gives an example of well, what if I thought, like I was too short, and I felt self-conscious about that, and I felt unworthy because of my height. And the idea of bringing that into an all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. How is my height having to do fuck all with anybody? And his argument is that if you, this is a kind of a stretch, but if everything else ceased to exist and it was just you in the world, just kind of floating there in time and space, would you have any concept of whether you were short or tall? And that how you feel your worthiness is based on a subjective concept from society, from what people have told us, from what our parents told us, from what our families told us, from what our ex-partners told us, yada, yada, yada. Story. And so ending here with the importance of seeing so much of what we see as things that make us unworthy as story, and taking it back to the meditation and continuing to break that down into its smaller and smaller, more manageable pieces. Because once you break it down to the 4 elements, what do you really have? It's hard to be mad at the 4 elements. All right, I'll end there. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or anything else? Okay. Cool. All right, Donna, so if you would like to donate, all Buddhist teachings are free, but there is a $5 to $10 suggested donation, so we can pay the rent. You can throw cash into the bowl. You can pay via Venmo. The Venmo is in the chat if you would like to donate that way.
It's in the description.
In the description, excuse me. Thank you. So, we're going to have shirts soon. I'm printing shirts right now, and I'm really excited about them. Maybe that's what my next talk will be about.
The importance of buying T-shirts.
The importance of capitalism.
Consume.
Consume and consume. Don't be consumed. Anyways, sorry. All right, let's dedicate the merit. May any goodness that came from the meditation, from my practice here today, be spread above and below to the seen and the unseen, to those being born and to those who are dying.